Earlier on today, we got a little bit more information on how content and progression is going to ship for the full launch of the game, but also, probably most importantly, post-launch too. Games as a service are the buzzword for 2019, just the general live service games tend to be all the rage, and Anthem is definitely going to be one of them. However, with games like Fallout 76, and even the problems that Battlefield 5 faced, a lot of people are looking at Anthem and going, there's just not enough content at launch, especially endgame. And whilst I do agree to an extent, it isn't as cut and dry as that. And even the devs at BioWare have a lot to say on that subject. So we'll go over what they say, and then some really good points about Anthem's endgame that nobody else has really brought up yet from various amounts of people. My name is Ryan Central. If you want more Anthem content, then you can subscribe to the channel. And also we have a giveaway going on at the moment for the Legion of Dawn edition of the game, but a runner-up will also win a standard copy too, so double the chance of winning. You can enter in the comments below, really straightforward to do so. In this article there is also information about Cataclysms, but I do want to preface and say that it's not necessarily about what content is in the Cataclysms, but more how they work in the time frame, similar to seasonal events, which are also covered in this interview. This comes from a Game Rant article, and it's with Mark Darrah, who of course is one of the main people behind the general ideas as he is an executive producer. There are a couple of questions going over how they named the game Anthem and stuff like that, which I will skip. If you want to check out the full article, it's in the description. But one of the big things around Anthem was the optimization and all of the bug fixes and all of the quality of life stuff that Anthem will need in a live game that wasn't present in either of the demos. Mark Darrah was asked, how quickly do you believe the team will be able to make bug fixes, balance changes, or anything in the world that might need fixing? Mark Darrah says it depends on what we have to do. A lot of the balance stuff is actually driven from the server side, so we can theoretically do that immediately, like within the first couple of minutes. Then if we're getting into stuff that requires actual content, then it could take anywhere from a couple of days to do something relatively simple to up to potentially weeks if it has to be something major. Now I think we could do a lot of stuff to react to the way people are going to engage with exploits, to deal with features that may be broken under certain circumstances just from the server side, which we could do right away. From the sounds of it, there's going to be a lot of fixes going into the launch of the game, but the main question is how better optimized it is, both on console and PC. It was a very CPU intensive game for me for the demo, and I have a pretty good setup. A lot of people have asked me, I have a 6700K i7 processor and a 1080 Ti, and even I was struggling. Of course, going off the roadmap, we know that there will be quality of life features coming into the game at some point, some of which will go in at launch, some of which will come a little bit later, but the main thing is that they get that optimization right. People can play without a def spectator cam for a couple of weeks or maybe even a month, but people can't play if the game runs like complete ass. So hopefully they have their priorities straight there. But I do imagine a lot of that will be sorted for launch. Maybe not all of it, but some of it at least. But getting back on track to how content is going to work, how does Anthem intend to avoid potential content droughts and keep players engaged within its loot-driven play cycles? It's a long answer here, but it's a pretty good one. So from the progression cycle, the game is designed that you have several different horizons. So at first, your goal is to get through the critical path, so the main story. Then you get to level 30. Then you get masterwork gear or weapons for every single slot. Then you get masterwork gear for every weapon or slot that has the right infusions to get you the build that you really want to have. Each of those horizons is designed to be relatively long chase, but as we know, people get through this super fast, often way faster than we possibly could imagine. Again, reiterating on stuff that Ben Irving said, they could make more strongholds, but players can complete and do content faster than they can make it. So Mark Darrah goes on to say what they did for that. We introduce additional content things where we want to have a much quicker conversation with our players than we have in the past, where we are dropping things more regularly, more often, and one of those things on that is Cataclysms. It's relatively big, not big like a piece of story DLC we've done in the past, but something to chew on for a while that changes the meta. That introduces new ways to think about the game, and then we could do that on a regular cadence to make it feel like the game is pushing back on you as you're reaching your horizon. We can then introduce a new horizon, a new goal that keeps you engaged over long term. I find it interesting that Mark Darrah mentions the meta here. Of course, this is a very important word and will be in the future when people work out the best loadouts. Running 4 Rangers might be the best playstyle to have for certain content, but it does feel like these Cataclysms are going to really impact how players play the game by changing players' loadouts and what's required from them to play. Let's say, for example, people are saying that the ice abilities in the game are incredibly strong, so I do imagine at the launch of the game, so end game after launch, there might be a lot of storm javelins with only ice abilities, or rangers that can only really run frost grenades because they're so strong in comparison to the other grenades. That would be the meta, right? So maybe a Cataclysm is based around ice, where a lot of these frost abilities have no effect to the enemies or the bosses within them. So that requires you to try different elements and to get better inscriptions for fire, electricity, maybe even acid too. Almost reminds me of vanilla World of Warcraft with the Molten Core raid, where you would have to stack fire resistance gear. Otherwise you'd be set alight and you'd die a lot. So it could be something similar to that. Going back onto the Mac Dara interview, this is what he had to say about seasonal events and how Cataclysms will work in their time frame. There will be two things, let's call them real world events, which will be stuff like Christmas, Easter, St. Patrick's Day, even though they probably won't do a St. Patrick's Day event, but it's more of a cosmetic thing. The world will do some visual stuff, maybe now that it's at Easter, so Grabbits are 10 times more likely to be seen, and they're putting eggs everywhere. Those kind of things where it's more acute, short, and it's more of an engagement with the community. The second thing is Cataclysms. Cataclysms are much more of that season, more in the way that something like Diablo has a season, or Hearthstone has a season, where it's a timed event with specific gains at the end of a bigger thing with more story attached to it, with more endgame purpose. As somebody that does a lot of Overwatch content, in that game it has seasons, but nothing changes at all with the season, so the thing's ultimately pointless. It's good to hear that there will be seasons and acts and updates in the game that will have some significant difference, which to me leaves me very excited. It sounds like Cataclysms might be a time-dependent thing, but it does sound like they're going to last a good amount of time, so you should be able to experience them in any case. But this topic is also brought up by Ben Irving in a Windows Central article. My favourite website, by the way, in case you couldn't tell. The article says that the studio appears solely focused on scaling this existing foundation and establishing a reliable lifeline for the franchise. Ben goes on to say, certainly the idea in the short term is to update. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Put all the team we have on making the live service of Anthem as amazing as possible, and then from there are many different ways we can play out. We definitely want to make Anthem a game where you come and play for years and years and years and years, I'm kidding, to come. Already we've mapped out story acts for several years of the game, so we know exactly where we're going and what stories to tell. And obviously the details aren't fleshed out. That depends on so many things on how the game goes, what players like and don't like, but we're treating it as something that we're all in on. We think that's really important, and we need to also prove that to the players we need to. But he goes on to say that he thinks that there are some people who are sitting on the fence who are like, hey, if there's a cool live service, I'm in. If not, I'm not interested. So we recognize that we want to build confidence in the community that we do have lots of cool, amazing stuff coming. And even the aspirational things you've talked about, we have more Anthem to come and some brand new stuff that isn't in the game yet that we think will challenge players in a really cool and different way. There's another section talking about how the devs have been very front facing with the community, very transparent, and that relationship and rapport between the community and the devs is pretty strong. To take a little bit of this answer, there's going to be nothing more important when a game goes live than having a core positive community. So we can build trust with the community, then when there are issues, there will be more trust. Like, hey, we've told you so much about our decision making and thinking that you'll trust that, and we'll try and do our best to fix things and continue to communicate. An example of that, of course, would be the social hub to the game. That was one of the huge things from the community, from feedback sessions that we've run, all kinds of stuff. It just kept coming back. I'm not going to read the whole article, it may sound like it, but it is a very long article with some pretty good questions and answers coming out of Ben Irving. Another thing that they obviously want to highlight is that all of these game updates will be free post-launch, and they really want to have a player-friendly business model. But again, Ben Irving goes into more details on what lies ahead. Not so much specifics, but how the content is more or less going to work. The article says that the studio is aiming for a balance of smaller scale updates and then more substantial expansions. Ben says that you need a healthy mixture. Players want frequent stuff, and frequent stuff has to be smaller. Obviously you can't do big everything all of the time, but they want frequent updates to keep players engaged and playing the game, and then the bigger things are about, hey, did you leave? You should come back now. And it also works for people playing because the big thing is cool for them as well. So our plan is a mixture of these things, and it's a mixture of, hey, I go out into free play and there's this cool thing that wasn't there before, and then it's there for 2 days and then it goes away, and there's some rewards attached to it. That's a really fun evolving world, changing world experience. Other things will be more content, more progression, more itemization, and then again, brand new things that you might not have seen before, or new systems that kind of change how progression works. All the kind of stuff for us is on the table, and it's just more about the cadence and the mixture to it. We need to nail down and change based on players' feedback and start sharing to the public. But it does raise a really good point that I've seen nobody else bring up about why there isn't a lot of content in Anthem's actual launch. First of all, to quote my buddy Will from Your Anthem, it's not a question of content, it's a question of variety. There is enough content in Anthem, definitely. But in Endgame, is there enough variety? I think replayability is the most important factor in Anthem, but I do want to go into a bit more detail on that, potentially in another video. For example, I played the Tyrant Mine Stronghold like 20 to 30 different times, and I'm still not bored of it yet, because the replayability factor in Anthem is there, similar to Diablo and other games of that caliber. Obviously, you can play as different javelins, each stronghold running different abilities, and then of course you have all of the masterwork perks and builds that you can run, and the various amount of difficulties you can play it at. Meaning that yes, whilst you're doing the same exact content, the variables spice it up a little bit. This is where the comparison to Destiny and other MMO style games, I suppose, is quite damaging for Anthem. Well, this is a clip that came from the Destiny Community podcast. It's Tefty talking, who is a well-known Destiny community member. It's a really good podcast. I've heard good things. I don't really follow Destiny all that much, but if you do want to hear the perspective of Destiny players on Anthem, you can check out all of their details in the description below. But this is Tefty and how it's completely different to how it would work in Destiny.
A lot of people have been throwing around this. There's 3 strikes in the game to play. That's all your end game.
Okay.
And that is a really strange comparison, but it makes a lot of sense if you're purely a Destiny player. If you've played games like Diablo, the entire game becomes endgame. It's a lot like thinking raid gear, how you're only going to get raid gear from doing raids, so you're only doing raids in Destiny, right? Like, well, instead of thinking of that raid gear only coming from the raids, imagine that endgame gear coming from patrols, coming from anytime you're out doing the open world type of stuff, any strike like that. You can switch it up and do a lot of stuff like that and change the difficulty levels if you're getting your ass kicked, and then increase the difficulty for better drop chances.
As I said, you can check out all of the details for those guys on screen just then in the description, but the main point I wanted to highlight with this is mostly that maybe Anthem and Bioware aren't dropping a lot of content for launch is because they want to sit and see what the audience have to say. For example, after launch, a couple of weeks in, and players are going, yeah, we definitely need more strongholds, this is fairly boring, then that's something that Bioware can prioritize. However, people might be content with the amount of strongholds that we have. People might have a problem with legendary contracts. So Bioware could go about shaping those missions and changing it. That would explain why they're being so vague on a lot of different areas. It's not that they don't know, and it's not that they don't have content prepared, but they just want to see what the audience likes first. There's no point making content that the general audience don't want to play. Does that make sense? So if people turn around and say there's not enough masterwork perks in the game, all of these builds are fairly boring and substandard, they might add more interesting masterwork perks in the future. With people complaining about how weapons feel all the same and not that exciting, Bioware can then change how weapons work in the game. Everything that we've seen from Bioware so far have suggested that they are very responsive to the community, incredibly so. That if the top post on the subreddit for Anthem's launch is, we need better weapons, or we need better abilities, or ice abilities are too strong, then you could definitely expect Bioware to address that in some fashion. And that definitely needs to be stated and emphasized. But this is where I wanted to leave the video. I hope you enjoyed all of this new information. Take care, and I'll see you soon.